like that. There's this like voice coming from behind the TV set. Open Education Week, folks. I know what you're doing this week. Talking about, doing it, sharing. Of course, we have to give attribution. Kevin MacLeod's music, I don't know if anybody's familiar with it. It's just such a useful resource. And welcome to this live broadcast. I'm Alan Levine from Open Education Global. This is a series of conversations that we're having, unstructured mostly, but with a topic. And I'm really excited. This is the second chapter discussion we're doing from Higher Education for Good, which hopefully you will know about, but we have Laura Czerniewicz here who's going to give the overview. Look, there's the book. And Jim Luke, and the whole purpose for today is to dive in a little bit deep and have a conversation with Jim about his chapter. So welcome, Laura. Let's get some hellos out of the way, and then we can get on to the show.
Hi, let me give you a few introductory slides. If I just work out how to do that.
I will
put that on the screen. You'll do that. Oh, you're a star. Okay, so Jim's going to be talking about one chapter from the book. This is the book. This is Higher Education for Good. It's available open access. Yoo-hoo! And it's heading for 6,000 downloads for the book. And then individual chapters will have their own downloads. Yeah, I know, it's incredible. It's fully open access, and furthermore, it was free to view, but it was also free to publish. So this is really amazing. Catherine Cronin and I are the co-editors. Catherine couldn't be here now. I'm representing both of us. And these are all the incredible authors. We have a phenomenal variety of authors from every continent in the world, academics, junior, senior, very well-established, young and emergent, not so young and emergent, not academic, a very wide range of people involved in higher education. And the idea, the plan was to have as many voices as possible talking about what higher education for good might be. The book's divided into 5 sections. The first section is called Finding Fortitude and Hope. The second section is Making Sense of the Unknown and Emergent. The third section is Considering Alternative Futures. The fourth section is Making Change Through Teaching, Assessment, and Learning Design. And the last section is Remaking Higher Education Structures and Systems. So there are 27 chapters that comprise critical reflections, reflective practice, poetry, speculative approaches, theory-based, Jim's is pretty theory-based, dialogues, and then audiovisuals and graphics. And chapter 6, Closing the Factory, Reimagining Higher Education as a Commons, is Jim Luke's chapter, and he's going to be talking about that chapter. And I have read this chapter many times, but I haven't heard Jim talking about it. So this is going to be as interesting for me as it is for you. Thank you.
Excellent. And yeah, we're so excited about Higher Education for Good. Just 2 hours ago, we had Catherine was here with Christina Ranzi and Paula Corti, and we had a great overview and interactive participation with their Calm in the Storm chapter. But I want to welcome good friend, longtime collaborator, Jim Luke. I've known you so long, I can't remember.
Well, I can't remember either, but that may be half age on my part. I don't know.
So where are you, and what do you do where you are?
I am. Well, the full-time day job is I'm a professor of economics at Lansing Community College in the middle of Michigan in the U.S. And I just stepped back. I was for about 6 or 7 years. I was half time the Open Learning Faculty Fellow in our Center for Teaching Excellence, where I helped develop the Open Learning Lab at Lansing Community College, which supports OER and a bunch of experimental course design work and helps faculty and students and everybody connect with the wider whole web. I've stepped back from that in the last year, so I'm kind of teaching full-time now. Back to teaching full-time now, which means experimenting with my classes. And I'm in the process, I would say, the timing's not set, somewhere in the next year to a couple of years. I'm going to be probably retiring from the full-time day job. But I intend to stay active in the open learning area with a lot of research and writing, and part of that's a result of this book chapter. In how much fun it was. So that's what I've been doing.
Yeah, and I know this, but your career arc has been from well, it's a long arc, but tell us more about what it means to teach economics these days.
Well, there's a few ways to look at that. I think it's very challenging to teach economics these days. And actually it kind of illustrates one of the points from the chapter, I think, is if you're going to do it well, really do it well and be a serious scholar, economist about it, you got to face the fact that economics is changing itself, and more importantly, it needs to change in a lot of ways to recognize a combination of theory that just flat out hasn't worked, as well as the challenges of the 21st century. So we've got new stuff coming in, new ideas like Kate Rae, economics, and stuff like that. And then we've got this orthodoxy that is so easy to teach. And part of the reason it's so easy to teach is in the last 50 years, it's gotten so packaged up and standardized in the textbooks, and they all repeat the same stuff and do it poorly. And so, it's been this idea of, if it challenges, am I just delivering this content that others have created, or am I actually going to be a scholar and get students excited and learning and get them involved in this intellectual battle that's going on about how to help humanity and how do we understand it?
Now, I hate to do this. I'm getting a little bit of distortion, I think, from your microphone. Can you hear that?
Some too.
It almost sounds like like a steamship is passing, like a barge.
Yes,
it's okay.
It's okay from my end.
Okay. It might just be me then.
That. I hope it's okay also. I will. Do you have a mixer? If not, I will turn it down a little bit.
I temporarily muted Laura and maybe.
Oh, okay.
Anyhow, good. So we're good. I just want a question came in the chat. Of course, we're off on a tangent now. Does Jim have any thoughts on the OpenStax economics series? Because you read every economics book, but you're probably aware of this. Yeah.
I mean, yes, I use it. I presume they're talking about the book that's Greenlaw. Steve Greenlaw is the lead author on it now. It started out as Taylor's book years ago. Yes, I use it. I don't know if Steve's listening. He's a friend of mine. I think it's a good book, but I think, like all textbooks like that, even the open source ones, it's trying to be, it's aimed at, this has to be the book for everybody. And so it has to make editorial choices. Some heterodox stuff gets cut out and it becomes very hard, and that adds a lot of inertia to the discipline. It shows up, for example, like we know banks don't work the way they'll take my economist card away here in a second. Because the way all textbooks describe how money and banking works, we as economists know that's not really how a bank works. And it's important difference. And we've known that for a minimum of since the Great Recession. But, we just keep telling this tale anyway, because there's this, inertia. And somebody else says, well, you have to tell it that way because that's the way, the textbooks get adopted. But we get adopted that way because there's no choice. Anyway, I like OpenStax. What I really, really like about OpenStax is the fact that I can integrate it, because I teach all online these days, asynchronous courses. I have an enormous amount of what would otherwise be lecture and comments in a stand-up class. And I kind of call it Jim's Guide to Econ. And it's and I put all that not in the LMS, I put it on a public website. And what I like about OpenStax and the fact that it's open is I can integrate that textbook into my stuff. I can comment on the textbook. I can give them, okay, now in this unit, go to these chapters. Keep in mind, I don't number them or sequence them the same way they do, and I can tell students, read this, really, really read this section closely and stuff like that. I can't do that when 15 years ago when I had Krugman, couldn't do that. As a matter of fact, I can remember back in the day when we had to use, before we had the OpenStax available to us. I just tried to get an HTML file of the table of contents of the textbook so that I could tell students just kind of annotate the table of contents. And the publishers refused. Said, no, that's copyrighted. You can't have that. And I'm like, really? So yeah, I love the OpenStax book.
Yep. And that of course is the premise. It's like, you don't just take it lock, stock, and barrel. So let's get into your chapter here. Obviously you got the call, from Laura and Catherine. What was your impetus to write first, and then to particularly focus on this discussion of the commons?
I think you phrased that something about the call from Laura, and a little side comment here.
I saw her laughing, and I'm curious what's going to happen now.
Probably knows the story that's coming. So, I teach at a community college. Most of my career, the second half of my career, has been academic, teaching, and that overlapped. In the first half of my career, I was in corporate work. So I was in corporate planning and deep research stuff. And I was doing the same work, a lot of the same work. But when you're in corporate world, you do research, but you can't publish. Particularly, the client wants you to come up with brilliant ideas and let them know, nobody else. And so I hadn't published very much. And then I go to community college. We're not really paid, as part of this myth that I talk about in the chapter of the separation of research versus teaching. Community colleges, you're kind of discouraged. Well, they'll tolerate you if you research or publish, but it's like you're not really supposed to. They look at you strange when you do. And so I was off doing it anyway, but most of the time I was doing presentations at conferences about things I had done, empirical teaching issues. And along came the OER conference in Galway in actually the year before in Bristol. And about that time, David Wiley, who I love, open content, had written a blog post, something rather, about talking about commons and open education and books and stuff like that. And he was talking about public goods and so on like that. And just to be blunt, I like David, but he got it wrong. And I went, no, this is my backyard now. David, let me tell you. So I wrote a blog post thinking no one's going to read this, but I'm going to bet myself. It took off. And within weeks, I've got folks asking me, well, how's the commons work? So I did a presentation at Galway. And I was really in anxiety because it's like, wow, I'm doing research. And they put me in the research track in the big room. And I was going to talk about how a commons works. And Laura comes up to me afterwards, who I have this enormous respect for, and walks up and looks at me. And she says, Jim, that was really, really good. This stuff on commons is really, really important. We have to do more research on this, and you have to do it. And I'm like, what? So I went home and I started reading. And like a year later, there's this call for chapters. So I thought, okay, well, I'll put something in. And I kept reading, and I'm doing more research. And I got knowing more and more about it. And that's how I got excited, got into it, because I really got back into the reason I had to do some research was I had studied commons back in grad school, but it had been a while, and I kind of felt like I better go actually make sure I know what I'm talking about, and went from that and then I got into, well, I better make sure I know what I'm talking about on how higher ed evolved, and does it apply to higher ed or not? And it's just been a blast since. So that's how I got into it.
Okay. Give me the layperson description for an economist what the commons is.
A commons is it's misunderstood. Usually you hear it described as it's a big bunch of things that are shared. Like you'll hear of, and that's because we use language like, the pasture in the middle of an old, Middle Ages English village was the commons. Actually, what that is you need to have a shared resource that has some limits to it. And a commons is, how do the people who need to use those resources and benefit from them, how do they collectively manage the problems involved in maintaining and using that resource? And so a commons has actually been very common, pardon the pun, throughout history. We have a lot of them that have been studied. I mean, they may be 400 years old. There are pastures in Switzerland, collectively managed and shared for pasturing cows, sheep, and other folks in Switzerland, in particular localities. And they have their own system for doing it. It's managed by the people. It is not a corporation. It's not a business. It's not an agency of the government. It's a different thing. And this thing's been going on for 400 or 500 years. You got the same thing going on with irrigation systems all over the place in Spain, in India, in Japan. It works. As it turns out, people are not totally selfish, let everything for me, screw everybody else, the way the tale we were told about so-called tragedy of a commons. That's really not how it works. Now, there are some conditions to make it more successful, and that's what makes it interesting. So the neat part is that the commons is really a bunch of people coming together to figure out how are they going to collectively solve their problems using some resource. The most common examples are usually natural resources situations, a fishery, a forest, land, things like that. But the concept's been expanded and is being adapted to. You can think of space, orbits, as there's an effort to manage lower level space as a commons. Although we do have this guy, Elon Musk, that is trying to kind of abuse that by just saying he's going to throw up his satellites everywhere. But yeah, so that's a commons. And my idea or contributions, now, I mean, others have had it, is the idea of education, higher education in particular, is a kind of knowledge commons. And that's the focus. And if I had to put one or two sentences to summarize the chapter, is higher education from the beginning, and this is across cultures, since the beginning, like a couple of millennia ago, started out largely as a commons, but it was a commons restricted to a small number of people, usually a very elite group. And somewhere around 200 years ago, 100 to 200 years ago, because of industrialization, the need for higher education expanded dramatically. We needed more than just a handful of scholars at Oxford or at some monastery. We needed lots of educated people. So we needed to open the doors, if you will, and expand it. And we didn't know how to do that because doing a commons on a large scale is not easy. So what we did was, by default, we kind of copied what was happening in the industrial world, industrial revolution, which was the creation of large corporations and everything that goes with that. And so it was kind of like, oh, well, if we mimic that, we can then produce a lot of educated people. But that has changed our thinking in ways that are not good. I mean, the good side of it is we expanded higher education to numbers vastly greater than we ever had before the 19th century. The bad part is it's not working anymore, and it's abusive. So what I think we can do, and I think open learning, open education, OE Global, these kinds of efforts are the beginnings of how do we reimagine and change our thinking of, instead of having these colleges and universities that are just copies of, in effect, mimics of corporations or factories, let's rethink what's going on here. And if we can apply the ideas of commons to them, we have a much better potential, not just for us who are the scholars working in the community as part of the commons, but more importantly, will have a much brighter future for the entirety of humanity, which is why we are scholars in the first place and why higher education exists. So it's kind of grandiose, I suppose.
Hey, that's okay. The thing that pops into my mind is the transition from the elite commons, knowledge commons, to the factory one was driven a lot by external influences, and
very much.
And what you're suggesting, which I think most of us want to see and believe in, seems to be like we have to somehow make that shift from within, because we're actually fighting against external influences. Am I wrong on that?
No, I think you're actually right. You're right, and I think that's hitting it. And in fact, when you say we're fighting against both external influences and we have an internal challenge. And the internal challenge is at two layers. We have internal in the sense that, and I'll come back to the external challenges. Internal challenges in the sense of, and I think people pick up on this a lot, of particularly folks, faculty in particular, those who teach or who are doing research or who are teaching adjacent, if you will, the instructional designers, advisors, those folks that are working directly with students and that kind of stuff. There's a tendency for us to think that the internal challenge is administration. Because they're the ones that set the structure. They're the ones creating the vice president positions. And they're the ones creating the division of labor. And they're the ones that, are telling us we can't have this because of budget. And they're managing all those kinds of issues. And there's an aspect of that that's true. Yes, they're the ones doing it. And they're the ones that, when you look at the name on the order, the letter that actually makes the command that creates, an incremental step towards looking more like a business corporation and structured and operating that way. That's their names. But there's an attitude internally that we separate ourselves, we being in this case, say faculty and all those folks that I just talked about. And we act like, well, that's their job to fix the structure of higher ed. If there's a lesson from studying commons, no matter what kind of commons it's been, and when you read the fantastic scholarship of Eleanor Ostrom, rest her soul, who, the first woman to win the economics Nobel Memorial Prize, and did it for her work on commons, both at the theoretical and the empirical work. The workshop named for her and her husband at Indiana University continues. I love to participate in their stuff, as well as now it's been copied elsewhere. The evidence is there. Commons is not, you got workers and there's somebody managing the commons. Commons is self-governance. Commons is collective. It's us. And, any attitude of, I just want to go off and do my thing. I want to go off and read my books and write my paper. And I just don't want to be bothered. Yeah, well, there's the other internal barrier, is we're internally adopting division of labor. I don't need to be I'm not management attitude, and saying I need to be separate. We're probably also adopting an internal attitude of somehow teaching and sharing with other scholars is different if it's publishing and research, that there's, the one is creating knowledge and the other is delivering content or something like that. When we do that, we're adopting the language of the factory. So changing those mindsets is part of it, but we've also got massive external challenges. And that's what keeps me awake. Well, not the only thing, but one of the things that keeps me awake at night and days, that I am constantly thinking about and studying is how does that play out? How do we change this? Because, and I'm getting a little past the chapter now in the speculation of where the chapter's leading me. I think the external challenges we've got is that we're facing backlash. It's very clear, obvious to me in the United States, but the signals I pick up when I try to look outside the U.S., I think we're seeing the same thing. And you can call it, political right wing or what. It's not just right wing versus left wing or progressive. There's a lot of political challenges of it's backlash against the one thing we did right with the knowledge factory. The one thing we did right in the last 150 years with the knowledge factory was we got a whole bunch of people into higher education. My dad became an incredibly talented engineer that was able to accomplish all kinds of stuff instead of being, a poor farmer like all of the prior Lukes going back as far as we can trace. And that only happened because, as a society, we invested a ton of money in the middle of the 20th century in expanding universities and saying, hey, we need more folks. We need to grab some of those farmers and, give them a chance to be educated and contribute.
Yeah.
Not the farmers don't contribute. It's just we don't need as many of those farmers anymore because we learned productivity. So we're getting backlash. And I think a lot of folks, politically powerful folks, simply don't want educated folks. So if they can squeeze it, fine. I think we're also getting a kind of weird backlash in the sense that we've created a technocratic class as part of the Industrial Revolution. And part of that technocratic class are the folks that manage and lead universities and colleges. And when I say and colleges, so I'm not just, when I say university or higher ed, I want to make it very clear. I'm not like the New York Times that seems to think there's only like 15 universities and they all play in either the Ivy League or the Big Ten or something as a giant research outfit. There's all kinds of other places, colleges, 2-year institutions, and there's all kinds of forms all over the world. So it's really tertiary level higher education.
And I think
there's a lot of folks that don't want to give up the management.
Yeah. And I think Anne Marie has had some really good comments, and it's getting to the larger picture. It's like we're almost designed wrong to even, there's so many things that we're working against besides the organizational chart structure. That
I would agree, except for one thing. I always, and this is just a quirk. I teach a course called Comparative Economic Systems, and it's that word design. And I keep hitting it, hounding my students. They're probably tired by now, because I keep saying a political system might be designed, but an economic system is not designed. And I mean, a lot of folks say that, particularly folks that are, are being critical of a particular system. It's like, I mean, on one side, you'll have people say, well, communism was designed, communism of the Soviet type was designed to do such and such. Or more common, you'll hear like, well, the problem is, capitalism is it was designed to oppress this or that group and something like that. It's like, no, economic systems are not designed. They happen. They get explained is what happens. They get explained and rationalized as they emerge or after the fact. And I will include Marx in that. Marx didn't design communism. He actually avoided the question. What he did do was explain capitalism and say, that's why you need something different. And so I would agree that the current setup, the current functionality, what would be designed if it had been designed, is not helpful to us. We have to change structures and processes and stuff like that. Changing how we think is step one. How we talk is and think is step one. But we do need some active experimentation and sharing. We need to shift. And I think the biggest issues are the subtle ones that we're not seeing that we need to change. We see a lot of this stuff. We see the overloading. We see the adjunctification or casualization of the faculty. We see all those ways that people are abused. What we're not seeing and talking about as much is it's division of labor that we've adopted wholesale without question. And with that, a certain level of specialization. The idea that we've adopted some language that has commodified things, and we've gone along with it. We're not fighting it. I don't like. So I know there's been one frustration. I don't have a lot of great answers in this, so I guess I'm like Marx in that regard, a lot of critique. And you get to the end, and folks are asking Karl Marx, well, exactly how does the communism work? And he's effectively going, I don't know. Well, exactly how is this open commons going to be structured or work in higher ed? And I don't really know the details.
Yeah.
And I could probably suggest that if I did, it wouldn't have been a commons, would it? Because commons has to come from the people in the commons. We have to work it out ourselves. So
all right.
I'm kind of rambling a bit.
That's okay. I want to try something because I wanted to zero in on some of the chapter itself, and I thought we could talk through some of this. So I'm actually going to do a little bit of screen sharing here with your chapter, and
Yes.
And you have my highlights. I guess one of the things that really jumped out to me, which I hadn't been familiar with, is this idea of an imaginary, which is not imaginary.
Right.
But what is this concept, this construct, and how did you find it useful for discussing the commons?
I initially, when I first ran across the concept of the language of social imaginary, I was a bit resistant myself. I was thinking, oh, they're just inventing a new word for paradigm. And in some ways you can think of it that way. I actually owe this, so shout out here to Su Ming Koo in Ireland, and she led me to that. And I really like Taylor's work on that. What I like about it is the realization of it's like collective unconscious. It's all the stuff that we together just we all so assume this is how the world works that you don't really need to talk about it. Mm-hmm. Examine it closely. And so, we, and that's what we need to change. And so part of the reason I adopted that language here was to try to urge people to realize just how much of our own imaginary of what is a higher ed institution has actually coalesced in about the last 150 years. That, if you go back much that far, and of course, higher ed, just about anywhere in the world, has been around in some form. And they would look at you strange, if you said, oh, well, you need to have a president, a vice president or a chancellor, and you need to have an org chart. They would all look at you strangely. and ask what's an org chart.
Yeah.
We just assume. So I think that's why I adopted it, was to try to open that up.
Yeah, and I think the "this is water" explanation from David Foster Waller does it well. Like, we don't know we're swimming in it, right?
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that analogy. It's like, yeah, what's water? And it's because of that, I ask myself that all the time on a bunch of things. So what am I missing? Because I'm just assuming it. You know, it's just so. Well, here's why that story connected for me, and in so doing, it illustrates a point. What I dislike so much about higher ed, and it comes across in the chapter, I think, is the fact that we've focused somehow on producing knowledgeable graduates. And the reason a graduate is, you know, knowledgeable and useful is we just assume because then they can do something productive. Well, what's productive? Well, productive means make money. And so, you know, everything has to be focused on that kind of thing. And when I went to college, yes, I was pretty focused in my majors. I just couldn't pick one. I was trying to do too many of them. But my first year in college was kind of like I had stayed out after high school from education for a while, and I went back and I just signed up for a course in film criticism, motion picture criticism. And I mean, you know, I was 19. The truth is, I signed up for it because I thought, you know, I might meet girls. I had nothing to do with my major. It was not required. It would never have been required. And yet it was, you know, this thing, you know, God, we got together once a week, we watched a movie, and the professor gave us some stuff to look for in the movie, and we learned whatever. I learned a lot in that course. One thing I learned, though, that just stuck out, it was the idea of, when you were watching something, was ask yourself what's not in the shot. What is, you know, so the camera's got you focused on this or that. What is the camera not looking at? And then, because that would lead you into all kinds of ways to analyze things. And that simple piece from that totally unimportant course that most folks these days say, I should never have taken that course, that was an utter waste of the state of Ohio's money and my time. The reality is that thought changed me deeply, both personally and ultimately professionally. And I can point to all kinds of stuff in my corporate career, for example, where I ended up doing, you know, was able to develop strategy and innovations for clients. Why? Because I had that plugged in my head. It was like, look for what you can't, you know, they want you looking here. What is it? I'm just assuming. So that's what the Imaginary was about.
And that experience you described, it kind of, in some ways, rewired the way you approach the world. And,
very much.
It wasn't because it was an outcome of a particular course or an objective.
Right. You will never find a student learning outcome, even if for the majors that have been in that course, that said, you know, at the end of this course, the student will be able to tell you what is outside the camera frame. You know, and there, no, but it changed me.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, it made me, that was a huge part of my education. And as a result of that, there were externalities in econ language thrown off to benefit all kinds of people throughout the rest of my life. And we have to fight for that. We have to argue for that. We have to maintain that. and it may mean, what the heck, I'm close enough to retirement, I can say, um, we have to have a little bit of guerrilla teaching.
Hmm.
It's like, I've got the official student learning outcomes. I do it. I can assess them, all that. But what I'm really trying to do in these classes that's not listed in the official learning outcomes is I'm trying to connect with these students as people and get that moment going where, bam, the synapse happens here and there's an aha and the eyes get bigger and they've changed. And I have no idea what's going to do that or when.
Mm-hmm.
The only way I can do that is by engaging my students. It's a dialogue.
Yeah. You did talk earlier, and I thought maybe we would just work a little bit more about the idea of a knowledge commons, because it's not like you can point to a building and say that's where the knowledge is. And so it's almost like it's in the water, it's in the air. But if I understand right, it's kind of a monumental shift to think about that as our priority. And also, and I think you get to some of this, like, as an elite knowledge commons, it kind of takes away this idea that it's, common for everybody. So there are these probably somewhat internally functionally knowledge commons that were exclusive or, elitist, as you say. And we don't want that going forward. But it's not like the assumption that a commons has to be, that open pasture that everybody can hop in the field with. But for knowledge commons, how do we, what are the things that will move us in that direction?
I think what'll move us in that direction, probably three things. The first one is the stuff that almost everybody who's watching this right now is probably already doing, because this is part of Open Education Week. And so somebody, they probably have some interest in open education. And what are the folks doing in open education, and I write that very broadly, whether you're talking the open access publisher type work going on, whether you're talking about OER teaching materials, whether you're talking about open learning, open pedagogy, a lot of that stuff. We have to keep pushing and working on these kinds of things. We have to make it a priority, to put open licenses on things and share stuff about that. But I think two of the other things, you used the phrase, where's the knowledge, or is the building full of knowledge? And I really liked that, because that's a question that I don't know if I was stumped. I struggled with for a long, long time before even writing this chapter. And that was, so where's the knowledge? What's the knowledge? If I'm going to call this a knowledge commons, and I didn't invent that term, right? George Kafensis and some others started using that before me. But as I began thinking about it, so I think I mentioned it, Eleanor Ostrom points out a commons is not the things. The commons is the people and how they work together, and what defines that group of people, how they interact, how they solve the problem that is posed by what's called the common pool resource, which is the things. And we have a tendency to talk about knowledge these days, and we've adopted this knowledge factory. We have a tendency to talk about knowledge as if commodify it. It's the things. And so we talk about knowledge as if it's books or publications, and it's not. I think I may be fighting again, working against the wind here or whatever. But in my mind, knowledge is not a tangible, you can't put your hands on it, because you can't have something can't be knowledge without being known. If it's not known, it's just information, It's not knowledge, it's just sparkling information. And where does the knowledge reside? Knowledge has to have a knower. It has to have a person. It has to have a human brain. And what that may mean is that we all have our own versions of some things. So that's what higher education is about, in my mind, is we are scholars. And so we're the commons. By commons, what I mean is we are the group of scholars designated by society. And we are charged with being the stewards of society's knowledge, which means, of course, we have to know a whole lot of it. And collectively, if you put all of us together, we pretty much know all of it. It's just that no one of us knows everything. So what do we do? Well, how do we steward this? Well, we pass it on. We pass it on. We pass on the knowledge and share the knowledge with other people who just need the knowledge in order to do things. Or we may actually share it with some folks that then want to supplant us and follow us as the next scholars or the next stewards of this stuff. And we may also steward this knowledge by using it to collect, by doing what humans do in the brain, which is taking this piece of knowledge and that piece of knowledge, and our synapses jam them together, and bam, we've got a new piece of knowledge. And when we do that, and how do we do that? Well, no, we share that. How do we share? Well, we may share it by teaching in a class. We may share it by writing a book or whatever like that. Now, it's very helpful that we've got libraries where we can share artifacts, because that makes it easier for everybody to learn and do this stuff. But it's important that we remember we are the stewards of society's knowledge. And why does society want to pay for us? Pay for us to do this, which, let's face it, this is, it's a cool gig if you can get it. You get paid by society to learn. And, for some of us, that's, wow, I kind of feel like, well, that's pretty cool. They're paying me to do this, but we're stewards of this stuff. And the reason society does that is because society benefits. And so that's the other things. We've got to get away from looking at the individual benefits, whether it's ours, and look at the social and the external, the broad benefits. It doesn't matter. We've got to quit this league table business.
Well, and I jumped down to the section, and you've been talking about this. It's about it's the people, and not just in like, yeah, people are a great thing, but that we're doing this, and this fantastic work that came out of Laura and Catherine's idea and putting it out in the world.
Yes,
didn't come together because people were part of some collective unit. They did this as individuals and came together. And we see that a lot in open. People are doing this in the spaces and in the cracks and on the sides because they find it important. And yes, it should be something that people can focus more energy on. But a conversation yesterday with Connie Blungren, it just struck me like how many more people there are doing something in the open space than say when you and I started out, Jim. Like there's like an order of magnitude, and yeah, it's not all of the academy, but there are a lot of people coming up in there that are active in this space, and that has to have some good positive effect.
Yes. Yeah. So, yeah, I've lost the question now.
I didn't really have one. I'm
Okay.
just like, no, I wanted to give credit to, it's kind of abstract. Yeah. The commons
It is.
is the
It's very
people.
abstract, and it's,
But we don't swim in that same pool with David Foster Wallace's fish, or it's an ocean, or we don't always know that we're in that water together. But I think here, I'm just going way too far with the metaphor. And I want to say, I noticed there's kind of a thing with fish in your chapter. It comes up a couple times.
well, you know what? Part of that might be because fisheries, when you read Elinor Ostrom's books, which I would encourage anyone interested to do. However, I will put up a warning to people. This is not, Eleanor's books are not lightweight. You've got, she'll just plunge right into a bunch of stuff, game theory and all kinds of other stuff. And you better buckle up and be ready. And if you're not, you might be better off looking at some other entries. And I would also, along those lines, I'll make a pitch here for, there's a book, Eric Nordstrom used to teach Grand Valley State University, wrote a book a couple of years ago, The Uncommon Wisdom of Elinor Ostrom, which is a fantastic book to start with if you're new to the commons, to real commons concepts, and why things like tragedy of the commons isn't true, and multiple applications and how this is all done. I would recommend people start there. And he worked with the Ostrom workshop on that and some other stuff. But yeah, we need to open up and realize that the knowledge it's not the artifacts, it's not the commodities. The reason we're putting Creative Commons license or public domain, putting things in the public domain, we aren't taking this knowledge and saying, oh, this piece of knowledge is now usable by anyone, as long as you give credit. What we're doing is we're saying this artifact that describes their understanding of some knowledge, and it has information in it, and it has data in it. We're taking this artifact and making it easy and free for everybody else to use it, so that they can read it, they can recreate their version of that knowledge in their head, themselves. And that's how we expand the knowledge. We're not building, a siloed tower. It's more entanglement type of thing. And so, the books aren't the knowledge, but the books enable us to other people to have the knowledge. Otherwise, it's just you. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I'm an economist. Someday each of us is not going to be here. But if we share what we know, one way or another, either by, a book that's open licensed, or we share what we know by teaching and working with and dialoguing and conferring with others, then we've spent a life creating knowledge, and that goes on past us. Wow, where did that come from? So,
It came from the Commons to you.
yes, yeah. So,
I really want to thank you, Jim. I knew we were just going to scratch the surface, but really thank you, Jim and Laura.
this has been a blast. Thank you.
for joining us. And you know, I think we need like more informal conversations to do this.
Yeah.
And I hope people are doing this outside of this little time window that
Yes.
we have.
Yeah. And all of you out there watching now or in the future when you watch the recorded thing, thank you for listening. And
This is in the Commons.
sure, I want to hear about it. Yeah.
And yeah, I was sharing. I've been annotating or just highlighting in my version of the book, and you know, I still believe in social annotation, and I think it's a great way to kind of dive in deep with this, because I have to admit, you have a meaty chapter, Jim.
Yeah, I kind of surprised myself.
But that's what we need. Like we need a whole variety of ways of discussing.
It is.
these
It is.
concepts.
Yeah. Yeah. Although I thought mine was easy when I looked in there. Had the chapter that's what, like 20, 30 pages of open education notes in haiku with 8 pages of footnotes. And I'm like, whoa, that's amazing. And I loved it.
Well, thank you so much.
I don't think
And parting words, Laura. I really appreciate you coming in here, and I've been seeing you smile along.
Yeah, well, I have a couple of parting words. Actually, the first thing is, Jim, I feel vindicated. Yes.
Where her intuition was on target.
Exactly. The second
And
thing, Jim, is
there's more to come. There is more to come.
that was the next point I was going to make. I'm throwing down a gauntlet. You can't talk about active experimentation and not give us examples. So that's the gauntlet. Active experimentation. That's what I'm giving you here. Take it. Are you taking it? I want to see.
I'm taking it.
Thank you.
I have a big stack of notes, and that's not counting the digital notes. And right now, I don't know, on timing, it's tentatively called Joy of Learning. Something along that. But yep, I'm working on it. And gauntlet taken.
All right.
Thank
it's
you.
out there.
Add to
out there.
which I'm expanding the chapter based on these kinds of discussions, which I'd love to have these discussions. I'm open. I learn as much, I think. Well, I don't know how much other people learn, because I don't think you can actually measure learning. But I know I learn as much, I think, as in these things as anyone. So.
All right. So we're gonna get the T-shirt, the Commons. You're swimming in it, and you'll do a bunch.
I like that.
And you'll do a bunch of TikTok videos. That's like the thing you have to do, apparently.
Oh yeah. Okay.
I see.
Just as long as I don't have to do the music or dance.
No. Someone that's out there. It's in the Commons for you to use. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in this conversation, and we got more coming this week. And Anne-Marie, if you're still out there, I'm going to sign you up for tomorrow's session. It's going to be great, and it's totally unstructured, just like this one. And with that, I'm going to play some outro music, and we're going to all Commons off to our next thing.